The cry lifted above the water like a secret unwilling to drown. Mason Reed reined up at the creek bend where willows leaned over the current. He'd been riding fence in a silence that had become habit, but this was no bird call, no calf. It was thin, human, and near-spent. He slid down, boots crunching gravel, and pushed through ice-rimed branches. There, wedged against a snag, was a burlap sack. The sound came from inside. His knife tore the rope. He peeled back the wet cloth and stared at a child small as 2 fists, skin gray with cold, lips moving. One word came, or half a word, breath pressed through weakness. Mama. Mason caught, the child against his chest, coat open to share heat. His heart slammed once, then steadied. He had lost wife and son to fever 3 winters past. Since then, the trail had been long and empty. But this was the world laying claim on him again. You're not dying here, he muttered. Not while I've got hands. He swung into the saddle with the bundle under his shirt, urging the bay mare hard toward town. The wind cut, sharply, but he held the child close, talking nonsense to keep his own courage up. Dr. Stone's lamp glowed yellow through frost. Mason shouldered the door open, voice rough. Got one for you. Creek gave her up. The doctor cleared a table, with a sweep took the baby and bent close. Weak heartbeat, will need warmth, steady feeding. He barked orders without looking up. Grace Harper, the widowed schoolteacher, had come by for medicine. At the sound of a cry, stronger now, she turned. Her face softened, then steadied. I can help. Stone handed her the cloth. Dry her. Keep her breathing. Grace gathered the child, rubbing gently. Mason stood rigid, hat in hand, watching as if the room's air depended on her touch. The baby stirred, coughed, and let out a thin wail. She's fighting, Grace said. Voice, low but sure. Mason's throat closed around words. He managed. Then she's got a chance. By the fire's edge, Grace rocked the small bundle. Mason crouched near, wide hands useless except to reach for more wood, to keep flame steady. She needs a name, Grace murmured. Mason blinked. His jaw worked. I don't reckon I've thought that far. Names give strength, Grace said. Hope. That's what she carries. That's what she'll be. Mason repeated it once as if testing steel. Hope. He looked down at the tiny face. All right then, you'll answer to Hope. The baby quieted, eyelids fluttering. It was a fragile piece, but it filled the room more than any hymn. Through that night they worked in turns. Mason kept the water boiling, cut the cloth into strips, and held the baby when Grace's arms trembled. Grace measured drops of milk, with steady patience. Dr. Stone checked pulse and breath, then left them with quiet orders. Dawn came pale. Hope's color had turned from gray to rose. Grace slept in a chair, head tilted. Mason stood watch, eyes fixed on the cradle they'd made from a drawer lined with wool. He whispered words he hadn't said in years. You hold on, little one. I'll hold on too. By mid-morning, word had slipped through town. An infant found in the creek, alive by miracle. Some said blessing, others said curse. Mason caught the sideways looks when he stepped out for more supplies. Sheriff Williams rode by slowly, reined up. Heard you pulled a child from the water. That's right. There's talk. Someone might come looking. Claims already brewing. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, steady. You be ready. Mason touched the brim of his hat, jaw set. I'll be ready. He turned back toward the doctors, to the fire, to Grace bent over the child. The world had changed its shape in one night. He could feel the weight of it, not as a burden, but as a charge. Hope slept on, small fists curled, as if she'd already claimed her guardians. The prairie woke with a hard frost that bit iron deep. Mason had not slept more than an hour, but he came up from the cot as if years of camp life had trained him for nights worse than this. Hope's breathing held steady in the drawer cradle, lined with wool. Grace was bent over, her hair loose, the look of a woman who had given every ounce of herself to another life. She made it through the night, Grace said, Her voice was tired but carried a quiet triumph. Mason crouched, wide shoulders blocking the cold draft from the door. He touched the edge of the cradle with a hand that looked clumsy against such smallness. "She's tougher than she looks," he said. The doctor came in, heavy coat shaking snow from the shoulders. He felt the baby's pulse, checked her eyes, then gave a short nod. "Color's back. Keep her fed, keep her warm. You've done the hard part." Grace straightened. "Mason did," she said. But Mason shook his head. "You kept her breathing." "Don't matter what part I played. She wouldn't be here without your hands." The doctor gathered his bag. "Town's already buzzing. Word travels faster than sense. You'll both need to watch yourselves." His look lingered on Mason. Men with power don't like secrets that make them small. When the door shut, behind him, silence fell again except for the fire's crackle. Mason set another log, his movements deliberate. Grace shifted in her chair, fatigue finally catching her. "Get some sleep," Mason said. "I'll keep watch." She hesitated. "You lost your wife, didn't you?" The words caught him off guard. His jaw worked once before he answered. 3 years. Fever took her and the boy. I buried them on the ridge. Never thought I'd hold a child again. Grace's eyes softened. I lost one too, a little girl, only hours old. After that, the house was empty, no matter how many students filled the desks. They let the truth sit between them like coals in a fire, warming, dangerous, too heavy to move quickly. Hope stirred then, mewling. Mason leaned down and let his big hand hover above her tiny chest. "You hold on, little one, we'll hold on with you." Grace watched him, a quiet strength in her gaze. For a moment, not Mason felt the room was steadier than the whole town, outside. Later, when he stepped out to fetch more wood, the talk met him on the street like a wind with teeth. 2 men at the livery stopped mid-sentence when he passed. A woman with a basket turned her face. He knew the look, suspicion riding side by side with curiosity. Sheriff Williams waited near the hitch rail. He leaned easily in the saddle, but his eyes were sharp. "Reed," he called. "I'll walk a piece with you." They moved toward the edge of town, hooves muffled on frozen ground. "Folks are saying a baby was found," the sheriff said. "Found by you." "That's the truth. And you mean to keep her?" Mason kept his gaze on the horizon. "I aim to keep her breathing. That's what matters first." The sheriff studied him. "I've known you long enough to trust your word, but others will sniff around. A child like that, someone's bound to claim her, or claim money in her name. Be ready for papers, and men who know how to wave them. I'll be ready." The sheriff's tone stayed level. "If trouble comes, bring it to me straight. Don't meet it alone." Mason gave a short nod. "Appreciate it." They parted at the fork. Mason returned to the doctor's door, shoulders squared against more than cold. Inside, Grace rocked the child, whispering a tune low as breath. The fire glowed steadily. For the first time in years, Mason felt the shape of a life that might be more than work and silence. But outside, rumor was already gathering weight, and Mason Reed knew trouble had the same patience as winter. It always came. It always stayed longer than you wanted. The wind carried the smell of wood smoke from houses along Main Street as Mason guided the bay mare back toward Dr. Stone's office. The talk he'd overheard at the livery still pressed on him, sharper than the cold. He knew how towns worked. Secrets had shorter lives than a campfire spark in dry grass. Inside, warmth wrapped him at once. Grace sat by the hearth, the baby against her shoulder, the faintest hum in her throat. Hope's tiny fingers curled around a fold of her shawl. Mason stopped at the sight, his chest tightening in a way he hadn't let happen in years. "She took milk without choking," Grace said, relief plain on her face, "and she held on strong this time." Mason removed his gloves, laid them on the table, and crouched near. "She's a fighter," he said. He hesitated, then added, "So are you." Grace looked at him, tired but steady. "No child deserves to be thrown away. That's all the fight I need." Hope stirred and made a small sound, more insistent than before. Grace adjusted her hold, but the baby's eyes, faint blue as creek ice, fixed on Mason. He felt it like a brand. He reached one rough finger near, and Hope clamped onto it with surprising strength. Mason swallowed, unable to speak for a moment. "You've named her True," he said. The door opened then, the hinges protesting. Dr. Stone stepped in, bringing cold with him. "Her lungs are stronger," he said after a glance, "but keep her wrapped and fed every 2 hours." He set his bag down, then looked to Mason. "Word's running faster than I can tamp it down. Thornton's housemaid was at the market this morning." She froze when she heard the gossip. Grace's eyes sharpened. "Mayor Thornton?" Dr. Stone nodded. "Biggest man in town, at least in his own eyes. His daughter was expecting a child, but Thornton told the congregation weeks ago that the babe was stillborn. If this little one is hers—" He left the rest unsaid. Mason's jaw clenched. He'd rather a child die than carry shame. Stone's gaze was heavy. "Be cautious, Mason. Thornton's got money, men, and the judge's ear. If he decides this girl belongs to him, he'll find a way to make papers say so." Grace stood, firelight catching her hair. "She's not a ledger entry. She's Hope, and she belongs with whoever will protect her." Mason nodded once, slow, but certain. "Then she belongs with us." That night, the cabin where Mason kept his bedroll became a shelter of sorts. Grace carried Hope inside, fussed over the fire, and tucked the baby into a drawer lined with wool again. Mason cut more wood, hands steady even as thoughts gnawed at him. He had fought Comanche on the plains, outlaws on the trail, hunger in, dry seasons, but this was a different kind of fight, one that asked him to guard not just land or life, but trust itself. When Grace dozed in the rocker, Mason sat awake, staring into the coals. The child's breathing was soft, steady. He thought of his wife, of the boy he had buried on the ridge. His grief had been a long silence. Now somehow the silence had been broken by a cry from a burlap sack. Before dawn, he whispered to the dark, "You've got my word, little one. Nobody's taking you without a fight." Outside, the prairie waited. The wind had shifted south, carrying the scent of thaw and trouble in equal measure. The night broke under a knocking that carried no courtesy. Mason was on his feet before the second blow rattled the door. Grace clutched Hope tighter, rocking on instinct, her eyes wide in the lamplight. Mason lifted the bar and cracked the door, an inch enough to see 3 men standing stiff in the cold. Their coats were fine for trail dusters, but their stance was wrong. City-fed, hired for money. The tallest one held a folded paper. "We're here for the child," he said. "Belongs to Mayor Thornton's household. Got it writ right here." Mason's voice was flat. "What you've got is nothing but ink on fool's paper. She belongs to no one but God, and he handed her to me." The man sneered. "You mean to keep a mayor's blood under your roof? That's theft, plain as day. You hand her over, or you'll wish you had." Grace rose from her chair, shawl slipping, back, Hope tight against her chest. "She was left to die in a creek," she said, her voice steady as stone. "That paper doesn't wash the sin from that act." The men shifted uneasily. The leader's bravado faltered for a breath, then hardened. "We'll be back. The mayor doesn't forget." Mason dropped the bar back into place after they left. His hand lingered there, palm flat against the wood. Grace stood nearby, silent but unshaken, rocking Hope until her small breaths eased. "Again? You believe they'll come back?" she asked. "Men who talk that loud usually do," Mason said. "But the sheriff knows. He'll stand with us." He didn't say what else he knew, that Thornton's reach was long and men like him wrapped their corruption in law like wolves wearing sheep's wool. By dawn, news of the confrontation had leaked. Market-goers whispered, some with pity, others with suspicion. Mason ignored it, jaw set, as he carried firewood past the stairs. Grace kept to the doctor's rooms, teaching Hope to grip her finger, humming lullabies soft enough to calm both of them. That evening, Sheriff Williams came by, dust and fatigue on his shoulders. He sat at Mason's table, hat low in his hands. "Thornton filed a claim this morning," he said. "Judge hasn't ruled, but it's moving fast. He's painting this as a family matter gone astray, nothing more." Grace's eyes flashed. "He lied to his own daughter, told her child was dead." The sheriff nodded. "If we can prove that, it'll turn the tide. But Thornton has half the town under his thumb. He'll fight like a man protecting gold, not blood." Mason leaned forward, fists on the table. "Then we fight harder. That baby's not coined to be traded." The sheriff studied him, then gave a small nod. "You've got grit. I'll see that the judge does too. Keep her close. Trouble's circling." When the sheriff left, Grace set Hope in the cradle and straightened the blanket. "We have to be ready," she said softly. Mason looked down at the child, then at Grace. His voice was low but unshakable. "I've been ready since the moment I heard her cry." Outside, the prairie wind shifted. It carried the promise of a storm, and with it, the first breath of battle. The truth came by way of a woman who had learned when to speak and when to keep silent. Mason was at the corral mending a rail when he noticed a figure standing at the edge of his yard. She wore a plain shawl pulled tight, eyes darting as though the very act of standing there might draw punishment. Grace came from the cabin, Hope balanced on her hip. Together they walked out to meet the woman. "My name is Maria," she said, voice low. "I work in the Thornton house. I can't stay long." Grace's face tightened. "You know about the child?" Maria nodded, looking at Hope with something close to awe. "We all knew. Miss Rebecca bore her quietly. The mayor told her the baby died and took the bundle away himself. Said God judged that the family name would not be shamed." Her hands trembled. "But I saw her alive. He paid 2 men to throw her into the creek. I followed, far behind. I prayed someone would hear before the water claimed her. Now," her eyes filled, "now I see God sent you." Mason's grip on the rail he'd been holding tightened until the wood groaned. "He lied to his own daughter," he said, each word ground out. Maria nodded again. "Miss Rebecca still mourns. She thinks her child rests in the earth. She doesn't know. If she knew, she'd tear the mayor's house down brick by brick to reach her." Grace exchanged a glance with Mason. Her voice was gentle but steady. "Would you be willing to speak this truth in front of the judge?" Maria's hands twisted in her shawl. "If I do, I'll never have work in this town again. Thornton owns half the businesses, but I will. I can't let his lie stand." "The child must be known." Mason gave a single nod, the kind a man gives when he knows the fight has found him. "Then you'll have protection. You'll not stand alone." Maria's eyes flicked to Hope again, softening. "She should be loved, not used." With that, she turned and hurried away, shawl pulled tighter, vanishing down the trail. Grace's arms curled tighter around the baby. "We'll have to bring Rebecca in. She deserves to know." Mason looked off toward the town, jaw hard. "And when she does, Thornton will come at us with everything he's got." That night the prairie air was thick, holding a storm somewhere, beyond the ridge. Mason sat by the fire, Hope asleep in Grace's lap. His hands were restless, cutting shavings from a block of cedar with his knife. He thought of Thornton's power, of the way money could twist a lawman's arm, of the lies that could make a good woman believe her child gone. Grace broke the silence. "When I lost my little girl, I thought the ache would never ease. I prayed for something, anything that would give the pain meaning. And now she's here. Hope. I can't help but think God answered in his own way." Mason set the knife down, looking at her across the fire. The lines of grief in her face matched his own. Maybe he did. Maybe he meant us to find her together. The baby stirred then, opening her eyes, looking between them with that newborn solemnity that seemed to weigh hearts. Grace bent and kissed her hair. Mason reached, touched one tiny hand. "She's got a claim on us now," he said softly, "and I reckon I wouldn't have it any other way." The storm outside finally broke, rattling the shutters with sudden wind. Mason rose and set the bar across the door. Trouble was coming. He could hear it in the timbre of the storm, in Maria's whispered confession, in the way Thornton's pride was about to be stripped bare. He banked the fire, then turned back toward Grace and the baby. For the first time in years, he felt something stronger than grief settle in his chest. It was resolved, heavy and steady as iron. The mayor came to them not with courtesy, but with men. It was midday when dust rose from the road leading to Mason's cabin. Grace saw it first from the window, clutching hope closer without needing to be told. Mason stepped outside, the sun, sharp on his shoulders, hat brim low, every line of him set for trouble. The sleigh halted, and Mayor Richard Thornton climbed down with the weight of a man who believed the ground belonged to him. His coat was fine broadcloth, his gloves kid, leather. 2 riders lingered behind, rifles resting easily across their saddles. "Mason Reed," the mayor called, his voice carrying like a judge's gavel. "You've got something that belongs to me." Mason stood at the edge of the porch, hands empty but ready. "If you mean the child, she doesn't belong to anyone but herself, and she sure doesn't belong to a man who'd toss her into a creek." Thornton's face tightened, the mask of dignity cracking to show steel beneath. "Mind your tongue. That child is my blood, my daughter's. She is mine by law, and you've stolen her." He produced folded papers, held them up as if the sun itself might bless them. Grace stepped to Mason's side, shawl tight, hope resting against her shoulder. Her voice was calm, but every word was an iron nail. "She's not yours. You told Rebecca she was dead. You lied to your own daughter, and you nearly murdered this child to keep your name polished." The mayor's eyes flashed, a cold fire. "Women's tales, a servant's gossip, worthless. The law reads what I put in front of it, and the judge will too. You've had your charity, now give her back." Hope stirred then, sensing the heat in the air, her small cry cutting the silence. She buried her face against Grace's shoulder and clung tight as though every bone in her body knew the danger standing before her. Mason took 1 step forward, his shadow stretching long. "You hear that, Thornton? She's telling you where she belongs. You'll not lay a hand on her while I'm breathing." The riders shifted, hands brushing their rifles. The mayor lifted a hand to still them. His smile returned, but it was cold as stone. 3 days, he said. "Custody hearing before Judge Parker. I'll bring the law. You bring your stories. We'll see which stands." He climbed back, into his sleigh, reins snapping sharp. The horses lunged forward, dust trailing behind. The riders followed, throwing Mason and Grace a last look that promised no kindness. Grace let out a slow breath, her knuckles white where she held hope. "He'll twist the court the way he twists everything." Mason's jaw was as hard as the ridge. "Then we'll bring truth, and we'll bring people who'll speak it. Maria, the doctor, the sheriff, they'll stand, and I'll stand till the last breath." Inside, he set the bar across the door. Grace laid Hope in her cradle, smoothing the blanket with trembling hands. The baby quieted, trusting, her world no larger than the fire's glow and the arms that held her. Mason turned from the window, his voice low but steady. "We've fought weather. We've fought fever. Now we fight a man who thinks himself greater than both. And by God, he'll find out he's not." The prairie wind rattled the shutters, as though to mark the mayor's words in memory. The house seemed smaller with the weight of what lay ahead, but in that same room, fire burned, a child slept, and 2 broken hearts had found a reason to mend. Mason sat by the fire and sharpened his knife with long, careful strokes. He had no illusions. This fight would not be won with steel, but with voices and truth. Yet every man carries what weapons he can, and Mason intended to carry all of them. Grace, rocking the cradle gently, spoke without looking up. "You said once you'd lost everything." "I did." Her eyes lifted to him, fierce in the lamplight. "Not anymore." Mason looked at the child, at the woman, and nodded once. "No, not anymore." Outside, the dust had settled, but the storm had only just begun. The town wore unease like a coat too heavy for spring. Mason felt it in the stairs when he walked down Main Street, in the way talk hushed as he passed. Grace walked beside him, Hope cradled close, every step measured, her shawl pulled tight as if it were armor. They stopped first at Dr. Stone's. The doctor heard them out, then drew a long breath. "I'll testify," he said. "I treated that child when you brought her in. I'll tell the court she was abandoned near death and saved only by your care. Thornton can wave papers, but he can't erase what I saw with my own eyes. From there they went to Sheriff Williams. The lawman leaned back in his chair, hat tipped low, but his gaze was sharp. I've known Thornton too long to mistake him. He'll lie, threaten, twist the law. But I'll stand in that courtroom and tell it straight. The baby was left to die. You two brought her back. That's truth enough for me." Hope stirred, tiny fists pushing against Grace's shawl. The sheriff softened at the sight. "She doesn't belong in that man's house, not if you want her to grow up with a chance to smile." That night Maria came under the cover of darkness. She sat at Mason's table, wringing her shawl in her hands. "I will speak," she whispered. "I will tell the judge what I saw. The mayor's order, the men he paid, the lie he told his daughter. I'm afraid, but I will do it." Grace reached across the table, laying her hand over Maria's trembling fingers. "You won't stand alone. We'll be there with you." For a moment Maria's eyes met Mason's, and he saw the weight she carried, the risk of defying the most powerful man in town. He gave her a single nod, the kind that sealed a pact. Later, when the house was quiet and Hope slept in her cradle, Mason sat sharpening his knife by lamplight. Grace watched him from the rocker, her voice soft. "Steel won't win this fight." "I know," Mason said. "But a man steadies his hands however he can." He set the knife aside, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Thornton thinks money makes him master, but I've buried enough to know there are things money can't buy. This child is one of them." Grace's eyes shone in the lamplight. "When I lost my baby, I thought my heart was finished. Now it feels alive again because of her, because of you." The words settled deep in Mason, heavier than any promise he'd carried before. He looked at Grace, then at the child between them, and he understood. This wasn't just about winning a court fight. It was about building something worth protecting, no matter what came. The prairie wind rattled the shutters, carrying the murmur of a town divided. In 3 days they would stand before Judge Parker. In 3 days the mayor would bring all his weight down upon them. Mason rose, walked to the cradle, and laid a hand gently over Hope's blanket. "You're not alone," he whispered. "Not anymore." And for the first time in years he believed those words weren't only for her. The courthouse smelled of dust, ink, and nerves. Mason walked in with Grace beside him, Hope resting quietly in her arms. Maria followed closely, shawl pulled tight, while Dr. Stone and Sheriff Williams took seats on the bench behind. The room was filled. Half the town had come to see whether truth or power would carry the day. Judge Parker sat stern above them, spectacles low on his nose. "We're here on the matter of custody for an infant girl, claimed by Mayor Richard Thornton, Mason Reed and Grace Harper contest. We'll hear both sides." Thornton rose first, papers in hand, voice rich and sure. "This is my granddaughter. My daughter bore her, but she is unfit to care for a child. I am blood kin established in this town with wealth and standing to provide properly. These two," he thrust his papers toward Mason and Grace, "are interlopers who have no rightful claim." Mason stood slowly, every inch of him steady. "Your Honor, those papers ain't worth the ink. That child was tied in a sack and thrown into a creek. I found her near death. Grace and I have kept her alive since. Whatever claim the mayor makes, he surrendered it when he ordered her death." The judge's brow furrowed. "That's a grave accusation. You'll need proof." Maria rose, trembling but firm. "I was in the Thornton house. I saw the baby being born. I saw the mayor take her. I followed and saw her given to men who rode to the creek. I prayed someone would find her." "Mason did, that's the truth." Gasps rustled through the crowd. Thornton shot her a glare that could cut, but Maria held fast, eyes lowered but voice unbroken. Grace stepped forward then, hope stirring in her arms. Your Honor, I held this child when she was near gone. I watched her fight for breath, for life. She is not a scandal to be buried. She is a soul worth saving. I cannot give her up to the man who tried to erase her. Dr. Stone followed, his words precise. I treated her when Mason brought her in. The child was half drowned, starved, wrapped in wet burlap. No family who cared would have left her that way. The judge's gaze shifted to Sheriff Williams. The lawman gave a single nod. I know Reed. He speaks plainly, and I know Thornton. He covers his lies with a coin. The truth's in this room, Judge. All you need to do is hear it. Thornton stood again, face dark. Lies, servants and drifters, against a man of standing. Will you trust the word of outcasts over my name? But before the judge could answer, hope wriggled in Grace's arms. Mason stepped near, hand outstretched. The child reached for him, took her first unsteady steps toward his broad frame, then pressed against his chest. A single word came, small, but clear. Papa. The room fell silent. Grace's hand covered her mouth, tears brimming. Maria wept openly. Even the sheriff's hard jaw softened. Judge Parker removed his spectacles, set them down slowly. Sometimes truth comes not in testimony, but in a child's choice. I've heard enough. He turned to Thornton, eyes sharp as flint. Your claim is denied. Custody rests with Reed and Harper. Miss Rebecca may visit under their care. As for you, sir, consider your standing in this town weighed and found wanting. The gavel fell like thunder. Thornton stood rigid, lips bloodless, then stormed out, his men trailing. Murmurs filled the room, most of them siding with Mason and Grace now that the truth had been spoken plain. Grace clutched Mason's arm, hope still clinging to his chest. Mason's voice was low but steady. It settled then. The judge leaned forward, softer now. It is. But remember, this isn't just a child in your care. It's hope itself. See that you raise her well. Mason nodded once. We will. The prairie wind outside rattled the windows as if it too approved. Rebecca Thornton came to the cabin with eyes that carried too many storms. Grace opened the door, hope on her hip, and for a long moment, Rebecca just stared at the child. Her lips trembled, her gloved hands tightening until they seemed to hurt. She's mine, she whispered. Grace stepped aside gently. She is, and she's alive. Your father lied. Rebecca pressed a hand to her mouth, choking back a sob. Mason stood close, steady as a fence post, watching the truth shatter and rebuild in her face. She dropped to her knees, reaching for the child. Hope blinked at her, then reached a small hand forward, curious and unafraid. I held you only once, Rebecca murmured, tears falling freely now. They told me you were gone. They buried an empty box. I thought I was cursed. She looked up at Grace, at Mason. You saved her. Mason's voice was low, rough from use. We pulled her from the creek. She was near gone. Grace nursed. Her back and the town stood witness. The judge has ruled she's ours to raise, but you're welcome in her life if you come with truth, not lies. Rebecca nodded, shoulders shaking. I don't want to take her. I only want to know her, to hold her sometimes, to hear her call me mother if she'll allow it. Grace knelt beside her, hope between them. Then let her grow with more love, not less. She'll know you, Rebecca. She'll know the difference between cruelty and care. Behind them, Maria entered quietly, shawl drawn close. She laid a hand on Rebecca's shoulder. I told them, child. I couldn't let your father bury her twice. The truth is out now, and it can't be undone. Rebecca's grief burned into anger. He'll pay for this. Mason shook his head. He already has. The town's seen the papers for what they are. He's lost his power. He'll live out his days without respect, which is worse than any cell for a man like him. Sheriff Williams confirmed it 2 days later. He rode up, dust clinging to his coat, and leaned in the doorway. Thornton's men scattered. No one wants to be tied to him now. The businesses he owned are being sold to pay his debts. Folks spit when he passes. The sheriff's gaze softened as he looked at the baby. That child has already undone him. Grace lifted Hope, the baby's laugh carrying like birdsong in the quiet. Rebecca sat nearby, touching her daughter's hand as though it might vanish again. Maria brewed coffee on the stove. The cabin was full, not of whispers or fear, but of something steadier. Life put back where it belonged. That evening, when the others had gone, Mason stood outside with Grace. Stars burned sharp in the cold sky. Hope slept between them in a cradle he'd built by hand. "You reckon she'll remember any of this?" Grace asked softly. Mason shook his head. "No, and that's the blessing. She'll only remember what comes after." He looked at Grace, his voice quieter. "And what comes after, I want it to be you and me raising her together, not just because she needs it, because I do." Grace's eyes glistened in starlight. "I never thought I'd hear that again. But yes, Mason. We'll do it together." The prairie stretched out before them, wide and merciless. But for the first time in years, Mason Reed felt it promise more than hardship. It promised a home. The wedding came without trumpets, only the honest sound of neighbors gathering. Hattie from the mercantile brought wildflowers in a tin can. Maria stood near the stove, face unburdened for the first time in years. Rebecca sat quietly in the front row, her eyes never leaving Hope. Sheriff Williams and Dr. Stone stood like kin, their presence enough to warn off anyone who might stir trouble. Mason wore his best shirt, the one Grace had mended twice. Grace wore a simple white dress, no veil, but a ribbon in her hair. Hope fussed in Grace's arms until Mason took her, and then she calmed, small fingers tugging at his beard as if to bless the moment herself. The preacher spoke plain words about vows, work, and trust. Mason's hand closed around Grace's, rough palm steady as oak. "I lost nearly everything," he said in a low voice meant only for her. "But with you, I've found more than I ever dreamed." Grace's answer trembled but held fast. "I thought my heart was broken for good. Then you and Hope came, and now it beats strong again." The vows were made, and the cabin filled with the quiet hum of approval. No shouts, no grand fanfare, just the kind of silence that comes when truth settles in its rightful place. Years later, on her 5th birthday, Hope blew out candles on a small cake Grace had baked. She laughed, cheeks smeared with frosting, and told Mason and Grace, "I already have everything. I have Mama, Papa, and home." The words carved deeper than any judge's gavel. That night, Grace retold the story of the creek rescue as she always did, Hope tucked between them. "He heard you cry, and the world changed," Grace whispered. Hope's eyes fluttered shut, her breathing even. Mason pulled the quilt higher and laid his hand across them both. Outside, the prairie wind moved over grass and ridge, but inside, the cabin held steady, a place of chosen family, of hope kept alive. This story made history, not in books or speeches, but in the quiet endurance of love that refused to be bought or buried. If you'd like more frontier tales of grit, love, and redemption told in this cinematic style, tap subscribe and like, so the next story finds you first.